Hello everyone, my name is Benjamin Yoder with One Controller Port, here today to talk to you about Xenoblade Chronicles X. This is a 2015 release from Monolith Soft, and I'm going to apologize in advance for the length of this video. As a Monolith Soft fan, I got a lot of feelings about this game, so if you don't know what this is, it's basically kind of like a spin-off of Xenoblade Chronicles, though at the time that may not have been as clear. I think some people kind of interpreted it as a sequel in some ways too. But on the surface level, it looks very similar to Xenoblade Chronicles. But once you start looking at the game structurally, mechanically, and in some ways tonally, it's actually very different, with the most noticeable difference being the world structure. I think some people would disagree with me on this, but Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 aren't really open world games. They're more of like pockets of world that you go through throughout a story, and as that story moves forward, you kind of get pushed to new pockets of areas after that. In the case of Xenoblade Chronicles X, everything is open from the start. You can basically go everywhere with the exception of a couple of areas. And in terms of like scope and scale, it definitely feels more like a Western RPG, but it does have the like sensibilities of a more Monolith Soft style JRPG. And if you don't know, like the context of this game was made a few years before this, Monolith Soft said they basically wanted to be like Bethesda, which probably resulted in this game being made. Because of that change in structure that from like a more traditional JRPG, it's not a big epic start to finish tale. It's only 12 main story chapters long, and the main story here is pretty light. Now, the key scenes are great, but there's just fairly big gaps between the developments in the story. But they do give the game like a light structure, so the main purpose of the main story is to kind of like formally introduce new areas to you. Again, you can go wherever you want, whenever you want, basically. You also meet new races this way, and you also get introduced to certain mechanics, like the mechs is probably the most standout one. And through those new things that you're introduced to, those kind of open up new side stories you can do, and missions you can unlock. So it's really focused on side content. You're typically going to be doing, I'd say at least 8 to 10 hours of side content between major missions. And a good chunk of this side story content is really like character development stuff. Key party members get a lot of attention to detail in the presentation of their cutscenes. They still get the full voice acting and everything. But because they're side quests, it kind of keeps your party members kind of siloed off into their own stories. So there's not a lot of like inter-party interaction in this game outside of some of the key figures. And despite being, probably some of the more polished content of the game, what you're doing in a lot of these quests is not very exciting. It's usually like largely repetitive and kind of mindless work that you would expect to find in like an MMORPG. You're talking to a lot of NPCs, you're navigating areas in town to like collect info, you're gathering items to turn in for certain quests, you're killing X number of monsters or some kind of special notorious monster, things like that as well. And it's not bad, it's just, the typical kind of grindy quest that you would get in some of these more larger scope RPGs. And the rest of the quests that don't really follow these like main party members kind of fall into the same pattern here, with really the big difference just being less production values. They're doing more generic animations, or it'll just be like text boxes and things like that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean these are not valuable. If anything, they're probably the real strength of the game's storytelling. To kind of give you the background on what this game is about, basically, you're like the last of humankind trying to colonize a new planet while still being under threat of an alien attack. So you're kind of trying to, rebuild a society on this new planet, and through those, trying to survive, you're partnering up with various alien races and things like that, and you kind of bring them into your home. So you have these kind of culture clashes that happen within your founding city on this planet, basically. And so a lot of these side quests really come down to like helping citizens in your town kind of resolve disputes and acting as a liaison between, various races and sometimes even humans. And the human race is kind of more of a standout race in this game. They're kind of coping with being the fact that they're the last human beings, and they're trying to recreate what they can of home, on this new planet. It's a thing that kind of feels reflected in the world, although it's a little hard to tell if that was intentional or not. the town has like this commercial district and residential district and things like that, and all the areas here that are like recreational places for humans kind of feel like fake prop-up cities. And I don't know if that was like a choice or just like the nature of, you know, making this open world game and not spending a lot of time on these areas in terms of like, you know, making them look nice. So maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I will say like the rest of the game, when you look at the areas outside of these, there's just a lot of like density and detail to areas like the military district and the world map itself. You know, from a technical perspective, this is, in my opinion, the best looking Monolith Soft game. Like, yes, it's running in 720p, but as far as I can tell, you know, it runs, you know, consistently well. I'm not saying that there's no frame rate drops. There's definitely frame issues around, especially as you start getting more and more mechs in your party. But on a macro level, it's like huge, impressive. There's a ton of detail in the distance and things like that. And on the micro level, I'd say it even looks good too, unlike the original Xenoblade, where it gets like really muddy when you kind of zoom up. This game still looks good even when you're really zoomed in on your character and things like that. Now, I do know people have issues with this game's aesthetics. I personally feel like this game kind of extends its visual style out of Xenosaga Episode 3's art style, which is a very like, you know, early 2000s approach to kind of an anime aesthetic in a video game. You know, it has a more, I don't want to say realistic look, but, you know, it takes more traditional game models and then extrapolates like anime-esque features onto character faces. And in the case of this game, I think a lot of people find the characters just look very unnatural. But it was something that kind of grew on me, how the characters looked in this game. It definitely makes it look a bit unique, although, you know, I guess you could say that they look kind of dollish in kind of the lack of detail in their skin and things like that. But I will say, is you know, kind of in hindsight, with the modern JRPG market being what it is, I feel like most JRPGs that are not Final Fantasy really go for that cel-shaded anime aesthetic. So, you know, maybe it wasn't as much so back then, but I think today this game stands out a little bit because it does go for that like older PlayStation 2-ish era kind of look. Now, where it doesn't immediately stand out is its gameplay, because if you look at this game on the surface, it basically looks like Xenoblade Chronicles 1, and the core foundation is definitely the same. You know, you have this very like auto attack kind of system where you engage an enemy, your character will sit there and like whack away at the enemy. You have these skills mapped to the bottom of the screen that you kind of rotate between using the D-pad, and when you use them, they have like timed cooldowns and things like that. The big changes here being that when you're holding on to these skills after they've, you know, filled up, so once they've recovered their cooldown, they can build up a secondary meter to get like a secondary cooldown effect. So if you hold on to them long enough, you'll get like a bonus to that attack or skill. The other thing that I think is actually really cool is, you know, that like party yelling that this series is kind of notorious for, where all the characters are kind of yelling at each other during combat. They made it an actual gameplay mechanic, so characters will yell out certain commands and you'll use the corresponding skill to that command. That seems to have a wide variety of effects. Everything from recovering health points, I believe buffing some of your team members. You know, it also will do things like stagger foes, and you'll earn technique points, which are kind of like the resource pool for using special attacks mid-combat. The latter feeds into another mechanic called the overdrive system, which basically kind of buffs your character up, and you can kind of combo different skills for various effects. And if you use it properly, you can basically be in this overdrive mode non-stop until the end of a fight. And depending on what gear you're wearing, you really can exploit the overdrive feature in this game. And in true Monolith Soft form, there's a lot of character customization depth here. You know, you can equip different augments to your gear. There's customizable classes. There's a large variety of weapon and armor types in this game, as well as the ability to even adjust things like the logic behind the commands that your teammates yell out. If you want to spend a ton of time in the menus, this game will reward you for that. And also in true Monolith Soft form, it's also okay to ignore a lot of this too. You'll be okay for most of the content. Now, I will say this game kind of does have a difficulty curve problem to some extent. Like a lot of other Xenoblade games, there's not much separation of enemy types on the map, so you'll be in a level 15 zone, and oh, hello, level 60 guy. Also, your computer-controlled teammate might have like an area of effect skill, so, you know, he's just gonna call his big old friend over to give you like a good old punch to the face. But maybe more egregious in this game is the placement and design of some quests. Sometimes you'll like pick up a quest that seems like a level 20-ish style quest, and then you'll go there, and the enemies that you need to kill are level 20, but they'll be like smack dab in like a level 50 enemy fortress. And it's just really annoying and kind of a pain when you're trying to kill these enemies, you know, because you just have to kill like 1 or 2 of these guys, but like at the end of the fight you aggro like a level 50 guy and they just come in and like wipe out your entire party. And it's just kind of frustrating. There are some preventative measures you can take to avoid this. So like you can change the time of day, and depending on the enemy, they may or may not be there anymore. But in other cases, it's just something you'll have to deal with. And this becomes especially problematic some of the more important quests, like the main story quests or the side quests that you do with your other characters, because these quests locks the player into them. Like say for example, one of my party member quests was like a level 37 quest. Come to find out at the end of that quest, there's a level 45 boss, and that boss is standing in the middle of a giant lava pit with a little platform on it. Your AI has no idea how to deal with a platform that small for some reason or another, but that's just the case. And they just kind of all fall in the lava and die. So you're just kind of sitting there soloing this level, you know, this boss that's 7 levels above you, basically. So, you know, you can definitely go and kind of grind your way out of this predicament or find, you know, some sort of solution through specialized equipment. But that might take hours. And a big problem here is that specialized missions have special restrictions. So who can be in your party, what quests you can accept and do at that time. And as far as I can tell, you cannot leave this quest without either completing it or resetting your console, assuming you haven't saved over your one save file and saved like while you're in the middle of that quest. And why this is important is because there's this whole back-end affinity and relationship building system that you'll need to unlock certain quests. So you may not necessarily want to be stuck with one party member for, you know, 10 plus hours or however long you're going to spend trying to get yourself out of this quest, especially if like a party member's affinity is already way over what you need it to be, or if it's maxed out, so you're literally just wasting, you know, time, you know, having that character in your group right now. And in a game with a ton of this kind of grindy content and a ton of these like relationship restrictions around side content, that wasted time definitely is something that you become very aware of, and it gets really frustrating. So what I will say, and I think it's really silly for me to have to say this, is like never save during these more important quests. Save right before them. Go try to do the quests. If you can't beat it, you know, go back to your previous save file, go grind out then where you have more flexibility. Something like this might seem like a minor oversight, but there's just a lot of these little things throughout the game that really start to add up. One of my least favorite is around like the party member recruiting system. You have to go and talk to your party members in town. Again, this is a really big town, but normally they're in one spot. But in special character episode moments, they might not be there. They might be standing off somewhere else until you go and talk to them. And if you don't know where this episode moment is, they're just kind of gone. and sometimes this is just a day sensitive thing, so you can just like change the time of day, then they'll show up back to their normal spot. Other times they're just gone until you find them. So I highly recommend when you're playing this game using a wiki, because it's really going to help you out in kind of minimizing these issues. You know, it's kind of silly because a big part of this game is kind of building out the database of the planet you're on. There's even a really handy user interface on the gamepad that's like really cool. It's like probably one of the better uses of the Wii U gamepad that lets you review like certain quest information, view maps, even manage certain resources, and you can do this even during load screens. So when you're fast traveling, you can kind of sit there and poke around this screen and do stuff, which if you don't have this game installed on a hard drive can take a long time to load from the disk. But despite this information like always being at your fingertips, the game just doesn't always give you the information you need to complete a quest. You know, it may tell you, hey, go kill this enemy in the Primordia continent, but if you know what that is, that's literally like 1/5 of the game's landmass. So, you know, it leaves something to be desired when they're asking you to like search 1/5 of the game to go find one enemy without going and looking it up on some wiki. The wikis are definitely fairly good online. You can find the information you need. They definitely do sometimes leave something to be desired in terms of the specificity of where locations are. But you know, the online wiki was not built out by Nintendo. That's by other fans who recognize this game had a problem. And you know, especially given how large this game is, it is a real problem. When you're starting off the game, you're stuck being on foot, and navigating the world can be pretty difficult. You're going to run into a lot of dead ends, a lot of areas you can't figure out how to get to, although there is like a very flexible system in here in terms of letting you kind of platform your way up cliffs and things like that. That isn't as flexible as something like, say, Breath of the Wild, but definitely much more than other Xeno games. And it becomes incredibly liberating once you get your first mech and you get in that big robot and you can just like basically ride around in this vehicle way faster than when you were running around. And the thing is, though, is that you're going to spend a good like 50 hours on foot before you ever get in a mech. so it's like you're gonna basically play a full RPG in this kind of slow progression as you kind of walk around this massive world. But it's like also really cool that like getting a mech recontextualizes this world in a really significant way. It's a real testament to not only the size of the areas, but also the size of the mechs, because when you're on foot, these worlds feel hugely massive, where once you get into mech, you can really just like, the areas feel so much more manageable, and they really feel like they just shrink the areas down to a significant degree in a way that you can easily navigate the world. And I kind of appreciate how long they make you stay on foot so you can, you know, kind of get the scope of the world initially, but at the same time it also kind of leads to an experience that feels like it's kind of dragging its feet. It's worth mentioning that mechs do have their own kind of battle system in this case. It's largely the same, but basically the secondary cooldowns from the skill wheel are removed, and the overdrive system is reworked a bit, and in some ways the mechs feel a bit more limited in what you're doing as the player, but they're really powerful and a great crutch to stand on when you're struggling. Outside of some key events and some indoor areas that they can't fit into, you can basically pilot them whenever, so you can essentially, you know, call upon them for almost any encounter. Then the mechs have a ton of customization too, so you can really go, you know, hog wild not only on your character but also on the mech that you're piloting. And again, if you spend the time in the menus, you'll be rewarded. And I think that's probably the overall theme of this game, is like, if you invest the time and have patience, there is a lot to enjoy in Xenoblade Chronicles X. Yes, there are issues here, and I find them incredibly frustrating once you're like in the moment. But once you kind of take a step back and look at this game as a whole, it's really easy to appreciate just the scale and scope of the world they created here. Even as somebody who is not a huge fan of open world games, that's something I can appreciate. And if you're willing to overlook, you know, I don't want to say small issues, but you know, the issues peppered throughout what will likely be 100-hour or more journey for you, I think it's definitely a game worth the look. Especially if they eventually port it to Switch with some quality of life updates. That would be great. Anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming. OneControlPort.com is the website. At the end of this video, I'm going to link two videos. One is my Xenoblade Chronicles 2 review, a game that I'm also pretty mixed about. And then also one for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torn of the Golden Country, which is probably my favorite Xenoblade game. Not my favorite Monolith Soft game. I wish I had more Monolith Soft content on the YouTube channel, as they're my personal favorite game developer probably. But maybe in the future. Anyways, thank you for coming. Have a great week. Bye.